For this BioChem project, we will be evaluating the renewable energy source of biofuels and how biofuels have an effect on marine life due to the product of carbon dioxide emissions. Biofuels can be defined as biomass that is converted into liquid fuels to help transportation fuel needs. The two most common types of biofuels include biodiesel and ethanol.
Ethanol is one of the two most common biofuels used today. It mostly consists of any biomass high in carbohydrates and is produced through a process called gasification. During gasification, high temperatures are used in low oxygen environments to convert biomass into synthesis gas, which is hydrogen and carbon monoxide. From there, the synthesis gas, known as syngas, can then be converted into ethanol or other liquid fuels. It is usually made from corn that is heavily processed. This is usually in the U.S. In Brazil, however, it is processed from mainly sugar cane. There are some advantages and disadvantages of using ethanol. Some of the advantages are that it is used as a blending agent with gasoline to increase octane and cut down carbon monoxide and other smog-causing emissions, which is better for global warming. Another advantage is that biomass conversions contribute to the majority of renewable energy, which is good because then it decreases the use of fossil fuels for fuel. Also, because some of the cars in Brazil can run on pure ethanol, there is no need to waste fossil fuels and mix it with the ethanol, which again decreases the use of fossil fuels. A disadvantage to using ethanol, however, is that farmlands could potentially be permanently ruined because some of the practices used with ethanol destroys the fertility of the soil, which then ends the cycle of the renewal. The reaction of creating ethanol consists of taking glucose and breaking it down into ethanol. However, when this is done, CO2 is one of the products. About 19.64 pounds of CO2 are produced from burning a gallon of gasoline that does not contain ethanol. About 22.38 pounds of CO2 are produced from burning a gallon of diesel fuel.
Biodiesel is the other of the two most common biofuels used today. It is produced by combining alcohol, usually methanol, with vegetable oil, animal fat, or recycled grease. Research has been done to see if it is possible to produce liquid transportation fuels from microscopic algae or microalgae. In Europe, the production of biodiesel is executed with palm oil, and the United States, corn is used the most for production. There are some advantages and disadvantages for using biodiesel for fuel. Some of the advantages are that it is non-toxic, biodegradable, and produces lower levels of most air pollutants than petroleum-based diesel fuel. Another advantage is that it can be used as an additive, typically 20%, to reduce vehicle emissions or in its pure form as a renewable alternative fuel for diesel engines. Lastly, oil-rich microalgae strains are capable of producing the feedstock for a number of transportation fuels: biodiesel, green diesel and gasoline, jet fuel, while migrating the effects of carbon dioxide released from sources such as plants. On the other side, some disadvantages are that the process of growing the crops, making fertilizers and pesticides, and processing the plants into fuel consumes a lot of energy. Another disadvantage is that the production of fuel ethanol has been criticized both as a net energy consumer and also not as injurious as the world's population. Transesterification is a form of biodiesels. It is when glyceride and alcohol weakly react to produce esters, which contain CO2 and glycerol. This adds to the CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. Combustion is another form of biodiesel. Combustion is formed when methane and oxygen react to produce water molecules and CO2. This also adds to the CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, which is another disadvantage for biodiesels.
These are CO2 emissions that are the product of the combustion reaction of ethanol released into the atmosphere, which is absorbed by the oceans and affect much of the marine life. Ocean acidification is the decrease in the pH levels of the Earth's oceans. Over the course of 1 year, at least 1/4 of the carbon dioxide that is released into the atmosphere is absorbed into the Earth's oceans. This equates to about 22 million tons per day, and since the beginning of the industrial era, the ocean has absorbed about 525 billion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. Over the past 200 years, the oceans have become about 30% more acidic. The ocean is considered the biggest carbon sink. Ocean acidification creates lower pH levels in the Earth's oceans. Due to ocean acidification, many marine life are affected in negative ways. One of these species that is affected is the Coriaster granulatus. Also known as the granulated sea star, the granulated sea star is a large echinoderm that can be found in shallow tropical waters in East Africa, the Indo-Pacific region, the Great Barrier Reef, and around Fiji. In these waters, they can be found on rubble slopes, coral reef, and locations that contain detritus. They can be identified by their 5 thick conical arms that are connected by an elaborate water vascular system. These 27 centimeters pale pink sea stars are made of small plates that are held together by skin and tissue. They are carnivores and usually feed on mollusks, worms, dead animals, and detritus. On the other hand, one of their main predators is the sea snail Triton's trumpet.
Ocean acidification largely affects marine life, especially sea stars. Sea stars have the ability to regenerate lost arms. However, this process can be disrupted due to an ocean acidification. Studies show that even with ocean acidification, sea stars should still be able to regenerate their arms. However, as previously stated, this process can be disrupted. This disruption will cause a problem with the new arm, in which the muscle mass of the new arm will be significantly less than the original arms. This process also requires a lot of time and energy from the other arms to create the new calcium carbonate arms. Ocean acidification also has the ability to threaten the larvae of sea stars. It will make the development more difficult. As such, the larvae could develop into juveniles earlier. This could cause the timing to be out of sync with other factors that juveniles need. These factors include things such as temperature, food availability, and predators. As such, these adverse conditions prevent juveniles to grow properly, as well as put them at risk for survival. Finally, sea stars have shell-like parts. These parts are comprised of high magnesium calcite. High magnesium calcite dissolves very quickly, which makes the sea stars weaker. These now weaker sea stars have an increased chance of being crushed and consumed by predators. In this graph, you can see the correlation between the rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere compared to the rising CO2 levels in the ocean. As such, you can also see with the light blue line that the pH level of the seawater is decreasing due to the ocean acidification. A keystone species is a single species that is not usually abundant in a community, yet exerts strong control on the structure of a community. Overall, sea stars are considered a keystone species. Sea stars help to maintain the diversity by keeping the populations of other species in check. These species include organisms such as mussels and sea urchins. The idea of keystone species was proposed by ecologist and former professor of zoology Robert T. Payne. From observations and experiments, Payne discovered the necessity of the sea star in its natural ecosystem. He said that without sea stars, the area would become thick with mussels. As such, the sea star is an important factor in the balance of a marine ecosystem, as it keeps other species' populations in check and not allowing them to get too small or too large. Looking at this food web, we can see how the granulated starfish is a keystone species and fits into its natural ecosystem. The primary consumers in this marine life is the plankton, algae, and seaweed. That is consumed by the primary consumers, which are consistent of herring, mussels, and mollusks. Next is the secondary consumers. The secondary consumers, in this case, are considered the starfish, so the granulated sea star and the crown of thorns, as well as the dolphin. And finally, the tertiary consumers are things such as Triton's trumpet, and the seagull. Even above that, you have humans. And all of this goes to the decomposers, which we're using as marine worms.
In conclusion, there are advantages and disadvantages to using biofuels. However, as an overall assessment, we feel that biofuels are not the most effective energy sources. Although renewable, there are other energy sources that are also renewable and are more green to the environment, in which large amounts of CO2 are not released that affect the marine life. Due to the biofuel production around the world, more CO2 is being absorbed by the oceans, causing ocean acidification and are affecting keystone species like the granulated sea star. The process of biofuels poses detrimental problems for the earth, especially the marine life.